When my wife decided we were finished, I didn't have much of a say in the matter. She initially gave me a week to pack up and leave, but the very next day, I came home to find the locks changed, my clothes scattered on the lawn, and my belongings stuffed into boxes. At least she left me the boxes, I thought bitterly. So, for the second time in 6 months, I was scrambling to find a new place to live. We had moved across the country at her insistence, and now I was stranded, 1,200 miles from anyone I knew. I'd only been at my new job for a few months, and while some coworkers offered me a couch, it didn't feel right imposing on near strangers. Desperation set in as I spent 2 nights sleeping in my car. I called every room for rent I could find, trying to explain my situation without sounding too pathetic. That's when I met Tom. Tom was unusual. He found my story amusing in a way that caught me off guard, laughing and telling me he'd been through something similar. Before I knew it, we were at a bar, his boisterous laughter filling the room as he downed beer after beer. I wasn't much of a drinker, but Tom kept the rounds coming. By the end of the night, I was too buzzed to care about the details of the lease. Tom insisted I crash at my new place, and I was in no position to argue. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache in a bedroom I didn't recognize. It took me a while to piece together what had happened. The room was surprisingly nice, if not a little outdated, like something out of your grandma's house. When I finally ventured out of the room, the rest of the house was just as quaint, fully furnished and eerily spotless. Tom was nowhere to be found. After searching the house and coming up empty, I stepped outside. There he was, lounging on the porch with a beer in hand, greeting me like an old friend. "Hey, buddy. How do you like the place?" The view took my breath away. The house sat atop a mountain, not Everest or anything, but remote enough that you could see nothing but trees in every direction. It was peaceful. Tom explained that he'd built the house himself, 2 houses, actually. He'd lived in the other one with his family for years, but this house had belonged to his mother before she passed. It had been sitting empty since. "Figured I'd rent it out," he said, taking a swig of his beer. "Better than letting it rot." For what he was offering, it was practically a steal. A whole house for the price of renting a room? I'd have to be crazy to turn it down. But as the days passed, I started to notice little things that didn't add up. The scream still echoed in my ears, sharp and haunting. I couldn't shake the image of that young woman with the long brown hair. Her resemblance to my ex-wife gnawed at me in a way I couldn't explain. Something about the whole situation felt off. I sank back onto the couch, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. Just some rough play, right? But that scream, it wasn't playful. It wasn't the kind of sound someone makes for fun. It was raw, terrified, desperate. Then, as I sat there, lost in thought, I accidentally landed on the remote. The TV flickered to life, the channel set to one of Tom's security feeds. My heart skipped a beat as the hallway from his house came into view, bathed in that eerie green night vision. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that. But curiosity, or maybe dread, got the better of me. I flicked through the channels, each one showing a different angle of Tom's house. Empty rooms, shadowy corridors, and finally, the living room. Tom was there, sprawled on the couch with a beer in hand, laughing at something on the TV. Beside him was the girl, slumped over, unmoving. Her long brown hair spilled across her face, obscuring her features. I froze. Was she asleep? Passed out? Something darker? I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she just had too much to drink. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the better of me. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. I clicked to another channel, this one showing the exterior of the house. That's when I saw it, a dark shape moving near the tree line. It was hard to make out at first, but as it drew closer, the figure came into focus. It was another woman. She looked disheveled, her clothes torn, her movements frantic. She was running. My pulse quickened. Where was she running to? Or worse, from? Before I could process what I was seeing, the screen went black. All of them. Every feed from Tom's house vanished, leaving only static. I stared at the TV, my chest tightening with fear. The security cameras had never cut out before. Was it a technical glitch? Or had someone shut them off? My phone buzzed on the coffee table, making me jump. It was a text from Tom. "Hey buddy, everything's fine. Just some technical issues with the cameras. Go to bed. We'll grab beers tomorrow." I stared at the message, my hands trembling. The casual tone felt wrong, too deliberate. Too rehearsed. I glanced back at the darkened screen and then out the window at Tom's house. For the first time since moving up here, I regretted every decision that had led me to this mountain. My stomach sank as the officer's words sunk in. Nothing out of the ordinary? How could they say that? I'd seen it with my own eyes, Tom's bloody axe, the woman in pieces. And now they were saying there wasn't a shred of evidence. It didn't make sense. The older cop fixed me with a cold stare, his tone sharp. "Sir, are you sure you weren't dreaming? Maybe you had one too many beers, huh?" I opened my mouth to protest, but the words caught in my throat. Dreaming? They couldn't be serious. "No, I wasn't dreaming," I said, my voice trembling with frustration. "I saw it. I know what I saw." The younger officer returned, his radio still crackling faintly. "We've logged the complaint," he said, ignoring my outburst. "But there's nothing here to pursue further. Tom's clean. Tom's clean." The words rang hollow in my ears. From the corner of my eye, I could see Tom leaning casually against the porch railing, watching the scene unfold with a faint smirk on his face. It was as if he knew this would happen, as if he'd already played this game and won. "Sir," the older officer continued, "false reports like this can lead to serious consequences. You've caused quite a disturbance tonight." "False reports?" I spat, my anger boiling over. "Are you kidding me? I saw the basement, I saw the cameras. He's a killer." The room fell silent for a moment, thick with tension. Then, the older officer sighed, his tone shifting to something almost pitying. "Look, maybe you're just under a lot of stress. Why don't you take the night to cool off? But if you call us again without cause, we'll have to take action. You understand?" Before I could respond, they turned to leave. I followed them to the door, desperate to make them see reason, but they brushed me off. As they stepped outside, Tom greeted them like old friends. He offered them beers. They laughed, shook his hand, and drove off into the night, leaving me standing in the doorway, utterly dumbfounded. I turned back to my living room, my mind racing. How could they have found nothing? No blood, no body, no axe? It wasn't possible. My eyes darted to the TV, still displaying that mocking no-signal message. The feed was gone, wiped clean. Tom had covered his tracks. He had to have. My pulse pounded in my ears as a horrifying realization crept over me. I was alone up here, isolated on this mountain, with no one to believe me. No one to protect me. And Tom knew I had seen everything. That night, I locked every door and window, my hands trembling with every turn of the key. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent me into a panic. I lay there in the dark, clutching a baseball bat I'd found in the closet, staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn. But even then, as the sun rose over the mountain, I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom was watching. Waiting. The weeks that followed were a living nightmare. My life became a constant cycle of surveillance and paranoia. By day, I went through the motions at work, but my mind never left the mountain. By night, I was glued to the security feed, watching Tom's every move. I didn't know if I was protecting potential victims or just feeding into his twisted game. Tom was always one step ahead. His nightly routine never wavered. He'd leave for the bar in his truck, charm some unsuspecting woman, and return hours later, laughing and flirting. I sat there, fists clenched, helpless to stop him. But he never brought anyone else to the basement. Not that I could see, anyway. One night, after yet another uneventful stakeout on the cameras, I decided to follow him into town. I parked across the street from his usual bar, my heart pounding as I watched him swagger inside. A few minutes later, I slipped in after him, keeping my distance but close enough to see his every move. Tom was charming, magnetic even. He'd draw women to his table with ease, buying drinks and cracking jokes. But there was something else, something darker. I could see it in the way his smile lingered just a little too long, in the way his eyes glinted when he thought no one was looking. That night, I decided to intervene. I approached the table just as Tom was about to seal the deal with a young blonde who couldn't have been older than 25. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile as I slid into the seat next to her. "Sorry to interrupt, but I think you should know." Tom's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Buddy," he said through gritted teeth, his smile never faltering, "you're embarrassing yourself." I ignored him, turning to the girl. "You should leave. Now." She looked at me, then at Tom, confusion and fear flashing across her face. "Is he serious?" she asked. Tom let out a laugh, releasing my arm and throwing his hands up in mock surrender. "You see what I have to deal with? Guys had too much to drink, that's all. Happens every time." But she didn't buy it. Something in my voice must have gotten through to her because she grabbed her purse and bolted for the door. Tom watched her go, the rage in his eyes barely concealed. He leaned in close, his voice low and cold. "You're playing a dangerous game, buddy. Keep it up, and you'll regret it." I didn't say a word. I just stood up and walked out of the bar, my hands shaking as I fumbled with my car keys. That night, as I sat in my darkened living room, watching the feed, Tom gave me a show I'd never forget. He didn't bring anyone home. Instead, he stood in front of one of the cameras, staring directly into the lens. "I know you're watching," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Enjoy the view while you can. It won't last forever." He smiled, that same unnerving smile, and then he reached up and yanked the camera off the wall. The feed went dark. I clenched the edges of the couch, my knuckles white, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. Tom leaned in closer to the girl, whispering something again, something I would never hear. Her face was a mix of terror and confusion, her lips trembling as she tried to process whatever he was saying. Suddenly, he stepped back, leaving her kneeling there, vulnerable and shaking. He placed the knife on the table, his movements deliberate and calculated. My heart raced. What was he doing? Why wasn't he finishing whatever sick ritual this was? Tom looked directly at the camera again, a smirk spreading across his face. He raised his hand, mimicking a wave, as if bidding me farewell. Then he did something I hadn't expected, he walked away. Just like that. He left the girl on her knees, still bound and sobbing, and disappeared off screen. I leaned forward, my mind racing. What was his plan? Was this some new form of torment, meant to drive me further into madness? Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. The girl remained frozen, too terrified to move, her cries growing quieter as exhaustion took over. I willed her to get up, to try to escape, but she stayed where she was, paralyzed by fear. And then Tom returned. But he wasn't alone. He dragged something behind him, a large, black tarp that looked ominously heavy. He heaved it onto the floor, the sound of the impact echoing through the speakers. My stomach churned as he unwrapped the contents. It was another body. The girl's muffled screams started again, her terror renewed as Tom revealed the lifeless form of a woman. Her pale skin was marred with cuts and bruises, her limbs bent at unnatural angles. I couldn't take it anymore. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and dialed the operator again. "Listen to me," I shouted, barely able to contain my panic. "He's killing her. He's got another body down there, just send someone, anyone." The operator's voice was calm, detached. "Sir, we've already informed you. I don't care what you've been told." I cut her off. "If you don't send someone, that woman is going to die. Do you understand me? She's going to die." But before the operator could respond, a sudden crash pulled my attention back to the screen. The girl had made a desperate move, toppling over a table in her attempt to crawl away. Tom was on her in an instant, his face twisted in anger. "No!" I screamed at the television, my voice breaking. "Run! Fight back!" But it was useless. Tom grabbed her by the hair, dragging her back to the center of the room. The look on his face was one of pure rage, his earlier composure completely gone. "I told you to behave," he growled, his voice low and menacing. "But you just couldn't listen, could you?" I watched, helpless, as he reached for the axe. The nightmare had spiraled so far out of control that I was drowning in it, suffocating on the absurdity of my situation. How was this possible? The girl who I'd watched be murdered was now standing there, unharmed but visibly uneasy, her eyes darting between Tom and me like a rabbit cornered by two predators. Tom grinned at me, his knife pressed casually against her throat, as though daring me to make a move. "Go on," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Apologize to the lady. You've caused quite a scene tonight." I was frozen. My mind raced with questions I couldn't begin to answer. How had she survived? Or, had she ever really been in danger? Was Tom gaslighting me on a level I couldn't comprehend? The girl's lips trembled, but she remained silent, her posture rigid with fear. I took a cautious step forward, hands raised to show I meant no harm. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to do this." Tom chuckled, the sound cold and humorless. "Do what?" "I'm just asking for a little courtesy." "Go on, buddy. Say you're sorry." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. "I'm sorry," I stammered, my eyes locked on the girl's. "I'm sorry for everything." Tom tilted his head, as though considering my words, before finally removing the knife from her throat. The girl let out a shaky breath but didn't move an inch. "See?" Tom said, gesturing toward me with a flourish. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" I clenched my fists at my sides, anger bubbling beneath the surface. I wanted to scream at him, to fight him, but what could I do? The cops were on his side. The evidence had been manipulated. And now this girl, alive and unharmed, was the final nail in the coffin of my credibility. "Go home," Tom said, his tone suddenly flat and devoid of its earlier playfulness. "Get some rest. You've had a rough night." I hesitated, my feet rooted to the ground. But then Tom's grin returned, and he raised the knife slightly, as if reminding me who held the power. Reluctantly, I turned and walked back to my house, my legs trembling with every step. Once inside, I locked the door, closed the curtains, and collapsed onto the couch. I stared at the blank security feed on my TV, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and despair. Had I imagined everything? Had Tom somehow orchestrated all of this just to break me? And then, just as I was beginning to think I might be losing my mind, the feed flickered back on. There he was. Tom stood in his basement, the girl nowhere in sight. He looked directly into the camera, his grin wider than ever. "Good night, buddy," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Sweet dreams." The screen went black. This marked the first time in over a year that I felt a sliver of control over my life, a fleeting, twisted sense of victory. Tom, for all his arrogance and calculated cruelty, had been outplayed, and the weight of that moment was exhilarating. As Tom glared at me from the ground, bruised and battered, I felt a rush of power I hadn't experienced in so long. I relished the look of confusion on his face, the dawning realization that he'd underestimated me. "You didn't think I'd let this go on forever, did you?" I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "You've made me complicit in every sick thing you've done. But this ends now." Tom let out a hoarse laugh, one filled with mockery but tinged with something new, fear. He wiped the blood from his lip and managed to sit up against the wall. "You think you've won, buddy," he croaked. "This game doesn't end just because you changed the rules." I ignored him and turned back toward my house. The girl was safe there, tied securely, but not cruelly, until the authorities could arrive. This time, I had the evidence, and I wouldn't rely on the local police. I'd already started uploading the footage to cloud storage and sending it to every news station and federal agency I could think of. As I walked away, Tom's voice followed me, low and venomous. "You're just like me, you know. Deep down, you love this. The control. The power. You think you're different, but you're not." I paused, his words cutting deeper than I cared to admit. Without turning around, I replied, "Maybe. But unlike you, I know when to stop." Back at the house, the girl was huddled in a corner, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. She flinched as I entered but relaxed slightly when she saw it was me. "We're safe now," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Help is on the way." Her hands were trembling, and her voice was barely audible. "He'll find me. He always does." "No," I said firmly. "Not this time." As I sat down across from her, I felt the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. The murders, the manipulation, the years of torment, all of it had led to this moment. And while Tom was still alive, I knew his reign of terror was finally over. Or so I thought. Tom's grip on my hand was tight, but his laughter had an unsettling edge to it. "I knew you'd come around, buddy. We're partners in this now," he said, his voice dripping with a mix of excitement and madness. "She's gonna love the plan I've got. Been working on it for a while. Can't wait to see her face when she realizes I'm not done with her yet." I pulled my hand away, feeling a cold shiver run through me. "What are you talking about? Your wife is gone. She left you." Tom's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing. "You think she's really gone, huh? She's coming back to me. I know it. I know her better than anyone. She's just playing a game, but once I show her the papers, she'll understand. She's my wife. She'll always be my wife. This girl?" He pointed to the woman in the corner, who was now shaking uncontrollably. "She's just a placeholder. Until I bring her home." A sickening realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. Despite everything, despite all the horrors he had inflicted on others, Tom still believed that his twisted version of love was enough to bring his wife back into his control. He saw this woman, this innocent soul, as nothing more than a temporary replacement. I felt the urge to vomit, but I held it back. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I had to do something, anything, to make sure Tom didn't get away with it. But what could I do when he was so confident, so sure that his delusions were reality?